Hello, this is Brian Rowe with Mythic MTG Tech number 271, looking at a very serious topic today, which is the power of words, pronouns, manlands versus creature lands, and open access. I enjoy this game a lot, but once in a while it's important to dive into the weeds of politics, gender, trying to understand the impact that our language has. Sam Black, who is an amazing Magic player, a Pro Tour player at the top of his game, he's also an incredible intellectual. I've met him a few times here in the Seattle area. I would call him an acquaintance. I don't really know him as a friend. Board gamed with him a little bit. He wrote a wonderful article over at Star City Games covering a bunch of different topics. This was kind of an intellectual exercise where he answered a bunch of questions from people in the community and talked about things that were important to him. Fortunately, even though all of Sam Black's content is usually over on the Premier side, the editors at Star City Games moved this particular article over to the Select side. So it is open for anyone to read. I will have a link down in the description. You should definitely check it out. A quick aside on open access and the internet. If you actually want people to read your content, publish it openly. Don't put it behind a paywall. I'm glad that this was moved from Premier to Select because the social topics in it are very, very important. But if you put your content behind a paywall, nobody will read it, and it doesn't play well with the sharing culture that we have. Words are power. The way that we define things changes how we as a society interact with them. The words that individuals use limit your imagination and your ability to interact with things. My primary day job is in law, and law is all about words. These two email addresses are functionally the same. I receive email from them in a single place where I can check them at any time. But the difference in these two email addresses is gigantic when I hand them out to someone. The brian@brianrowe.org gives an entirely different impression of who I am, my professionalism, my relationship with the community. A .org feels fundamentally different to individuals in the nonprofit space than a .com. A URL that I own, brianrowe.org, feels fundamentally different than gmail.com, owned by Google in the privacy space. So each of these email addresses may be functionally the same, but the words matter a lot. In the area of copyright, there's been a huge battle in the last 100 years over what to call the exclusive rights in copyright. Are they intellectual property? Are they monopolistic rights? When I do public speaking to artists, I refer to their art. When I deal with lawyers, I refer to copyright. I despise the term intellectual property because it is factually inaccurate and creates an analogy that puts things that can be reproduced super easily by ones and zeros on the same playing field as things like apples. If I eat an apple, you cannot eat that apple. If I listen to a piece of music, you can listen to it also. And the net value of that music goes up the more people that listen to it. The economic principles in art and in copyright are fundamentally different than in rivalrous property. And naming it intellectual property actually harms creators and the new creative digital economy. Liking and sharing is fundamentally different from stealing, and how we label things determines how we interact with them and whether or not we even view actions as legal, ethical, or moral. In the disability rights space, another space that I interact with a lot, there is a strong push for people first language. When you brand someone with a challenge or something that makes them different, something where they stand out, before you recognize them as a human, it is adding a label to them in a way that is disempowering. A person with dyslexia feels different than a dyslexic person. The disability rights community, for the most part, has gotten behind people first language because it empowers people more. There's not universal consensus here. The deaf community would prefer deaf be before person and to not change that. But each community of individuals should have the opportunity to define how they're going to be interacted with, which brings us to two different issues. The first is inclusive language in gaming, and particularly how we refer to lands. I am an old school player. I've played a long time. I've played Mishra's Factories as the solitary win condition in several control decks. The old school way to refer to lands that turn into creatures is man lands. It's short, it's simple, it sounds good, but that doesn't mean that it's correct. There is nothing about these lands that genders them in any way. There's nothing about these lands that empower men to do anything. Creature lands is a much more accurate term. It is a term that isn't exclusionary, and it's one that I strongly support.
The second Magic card wording issue that I'd like to talk about today is a little more complicated and is going to take a little bit more time. I've probably shot this segment 20 times at this point over 2 days, and during the middle of creating this segment, an article that was very on point about Wizards culture and promoting diversity came out, which I'm going to address at the end of this. It's what should the templating for cards be? Should we be using the terms he or she, or should we use the term they? English is a very difficult language because it does not have a singular pronoun that is non-gender specific. They is becoming that pronoun in popular culture, in day-to-day usage, and is extremely popular with a lot of people. Now, to be clear, Wizards has proactively tried to be a diverse company. They now have a Planeswalker that is gender neutral. They have their first transgender character on a card. Wizards is actively trying to be more inclusive. We've known for a long time in popular culture that there is an entire range both of genders and of sexual preferences. But those things are not captured at all by the he-she binary. In fact, if a card simply said she, it wouldn't be promoting necessarily the binary of he-she that is clearly out of date and non-inclusive. There's been a lot of discussion over on Mark Rosewater's blog about this particular issue. He has 3 full blog posts that are dedicated to answering individuals' questions with regards to the he-she templating and whether or not they should be using they for cards. I'm going to address the more important aspects of those arguments here, and I'm open to any discussion in the comments over this particular topic also. The first one that is brought up is that things like your Chicago Manual of Style, or in the legal realm, it's the Blue Book, haven't fully recognized they as a singular pronoun, that culture is catching up, and that it causes some ambiguity. Now, I'm going to deal with ambiguity in a moment, but when it comes to where Wizards of the Coast, a progressive company with millions of cards that are read every day, should be looking, Wizards should be a leader in this area, not a follower of antiquated style books. More people read the Magic cards than all of the articles written under Chicago style of manual or the Blue Book. In fact, nobody reads those formal articles, and I'm in the super minority that actually reads a few a year. Almost nobody reads them. A pop culture game has the ability to influence where our society is going, instead of just looking back on where it was and its oppressive past. Waiting for style manuals to update is not the policy Wizards should be going for. Another interesting argument that was made feels very contradictory. It's that in order to encourage more women to be active in the game, they intentionally added the she pronoun, and that by moving to they would actually remove that pronoun, one of the more active ways that they try to encourage people to play the game. Which pronouns are used seems a lot less important to me than who is pictured in the art, the type of art that they use, the type of stories they create, the ways that they can engage girls' imagination in this game. I don't see any conflict between the use of they over he or she when it comes to inclusion if you are actively using the other parts of the game to empower women in the game. The new artwork on Force of Will is one of many examples where Wizards is moving towards showing more diversity in the cards and empowering women in a positive way in the cards. This pronoun change was a good step at one point, but is now antiquated, and I don't believe that it will discourage women from playing as long as the other aspects of the game continue with the trend that Wizards has already established of being more open and inclusive. Things like better training judges to have a tournament environment that is open and inclusive will go a lot further than which pronoun is used here. The artwork, the story, the ways that we can engage the imagination of children matters. Finally, there is an argument that using they on the cards will actually create some type of rules problem, some type of ambiguity. And the rules are what matters. Being extremely clear is so important. Now, I strongly agree that we need a solid set of rules. After looking at several of the cards on Gather, I do not buy the argument plating change would actually cause any confusion. Now, granted, I haven't looked at all 15,000 cards in Magic's history, but clearly most of the cards that I looked at, in fact, everyone that I looked at, would not have created an ambiguity with this change. I would like to see actual examples of cards where it would be confusing to read them in context. Now, beyond just reading them in context, Wizards has a 211-page rulebook for Magic the Gathering. They could easily add a sentence or two in this rulebook that discusses pronouns specifically, what their choice was, and how they're supposed to be read. I know that is not ideal, but if there actually is an ambiguity issue at all that exists with actual cards, yes, every card will need to be looked at independently. As a company with an extremely precise game, with extremely precise rules, I do not believe that this would be difficult to implement at all. Additionally, while I was recording this, there's this wonderful article over on Forbes talking about how Magic the Gathering has diversity as a marketing strategy. Magic is attempting to be inclusive in the things that they're doing. They're slowly but surely, and more quickly over the last 2 to 3 years, evolving the game to target more diverse audiences and to be intentionally inclusive in areas that they weren't in the past. This wording change is in line with their overall marketing strategy and the values that their particular brand brings to an inclusive gaming environment. Now that we've been talking about words all day, subscribe. Thank you. This has been Brian Rowe with Mythic MTG Tech. Thank you to everybody who makes the channel possible. I'm going to have some more fun, lighter videos coming out in the next few days, including one on the worst land and the most iconic card for each format. I'd like to point out that ExcalibursZone
has become a sponsor at the credit level. Really nice guy. I chat with him on Twitter. He does some videos over EDH. He's working on live paper EDH games on his channel. Very cool idea. This is something that I hope to do in the future. Anybody who wants to join on Patreon, I greatly appreciate the support. It's what makes this channel possible. I'll be doing pack openings next week. I've got them planned for the 23rd. Thank you to everybody who supports the channel. Until next time, choose the cards wisely.